Welcome to the Intrinsically Ordered Podcast. Today I'm joined by Minh, who is an online Catholic apologist and evangelist who caught my eye for his street evangelization videos, which I feel like are rare in the Catholic online space. And today we're going to have a conversation on a few different topics, as myself as a former Catholic apologist who has now left the church, and Minh, who's still in the church and doing some awesome work out there. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Cade. Yeah, so my name is Minh, and just a Catholic apologist. I love evangelizing, reading the Word of God, and I'm super honored to be here.
Third topic that we had emailed about talking about is homosexuality. I have my gripes both with natural law as a philosophy, and I have an hour and a half debate with Joe Heschmeyer on this issue, as well as a few other positions out there. My claim essentially with homosexuality is that regardless of, let's say, which theoretical framework we're gonna, or which metaethical framework we're gonna look at, I don't see how homosexuality can be condemned by the preponderance of the evidence really in any metaethical system apart from one that would presuppose a Catholic or a Christian conservative view of what God has revealed. And so if somebody comes to me and they say, God told me that it's wrong, it's like, cool, awesome. Like, I don't particularly care to engage in that. What I find interesting is a lot of people that would say, but we do have secular reasons. And so my first step in this discussion on homosexuality is like, are we admitting God into the conversation or not? Which I don't think that God condemns homosexuality, because that's kind of a separate argument. But if somebody wants to prove why homosexuality should either be discouraged or illegal from a secular perspective, I love engaging in that conversation as long as it stays in purely in the secular arena. I find to be a quite interesting conversation. So I don't know whether you want me to flesh out my position more on homosexuality, or if you kind of want to take the first stab at that issue.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that, for expressing your view and, just clarifying things. I would say, like, very briefly, I don't think that we have to dwell on this too long. You were mentioning that you don't see how homosexuality could be condemned in any other metaethical system except one of Catholic Christian conservative view. Well, consider, for example, like a non-theist somehow, finding some very interesting argument that does not need a kind of Catholic Christian conservative worldview. I think that's very well possible that he can find, hey, this is a point wherein I see that homosexuality would not work. So that clearly is possible. Secondly, I would say, I think you were mentioning, you don't really care about God saying that homosexuality is wrong. Even if, like, for example, if we do examine the biblical data, perhaps you don't think that God really does condemn homosexuality. I would say very briefly, and we don't have to dwell on this way too long, as I mentioned, if you don't want to. But for example, like, even in the realm of, say, saying that something is good. Like, I think one of the intuitions that people would have is if they are going to accept that they are a homosexual and they commit the homosexual act, they might say, for example, this is a good act. And maybe you yourself would use that word good in a different way, coming from especially taking the position of emotivism. But most people, I think that they would say that, hey, this is good as in, like, possibly like a moral sense as well. So it's the direct opposite from, those conservative Christians over there who say that the same-sex sexual act that I'm committing or that I'm doing is somehow morally wrong. Now, here's the thing. I think that very interesting. Alexander Proust pointed this out, and I found it very interesting. So in the view where we say, for example, let me see if I don't want to butcher his sort of position right here, but okay, I don't have it in my notes right here, but basically the idea is to even start with these moral claims that are, say, they're non-error theory, and so we're making really truth claims that, hey, homosexuality or homosexual acts are good or homosexual acts are good or bad, one of those two. Many people, when they're making that claim, to even start with, we need God to explain the morality that we do have. Not in the sense that, hey, the infamous Euthyphro dilemma, not in that sense, but in the sense of even to just get to the realm of morality. I mean, one of the things is morality seems to make absolute claims, and yet I cannot ground anything absolute in myself who is finite. So that's one point. So we can say, for example, God in his nature is itself good, and so what he commands is good for human beings. And so I think that's somewhere from Alexander Proust as well. But I think that the reality of how our claims match up with whatever category of morality this is, it's better explained on, you know, this reality of this God who gives us moral commands than, you know, on that principle of indifference, which I think naturalistic atheism would hold to, that, you know, at the fundamental level, there are just these, you know, non-conscious molecules that somehow is giving rise to morality and our abstract thinking of all these absolutes. So the absolutes I'm thinking of in particular, for example, bestiality is wrong, which is, I mean, people can search up the definition. Bestiality is wrong. Necrophilia is wrong. Incestry is wrong. These are absolute claims I can make, or to add another one that many philosophers like to use, and it's terrible, which is it's wrong to torture babies for fun. Like, these are absolutes that I don't think we can say, except in this one case. No, it seems very clear intuitively that if we're going to have absolute claims in morality, it would be somewhere along these lines, at least with the fourth one, you know, that it's wrong to torture babies for fun. And so I would start there, and it seems to be better explained. This sort of phenomena, where we're talking about morality in various ways, is better explained on theism than non-theism. And so, I mean, if we support homosexuality and are a kind of atheist, we don't even get off the ground, essentially. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I find the let's debate the merits of homosexuality by kind of going like a presuppositionalist, metaethical kind of route, which is like to have any sort of morality, we got to ground it in God. I find that we don't have to ground morality in God, that grounding morality in God is, you still reach this circular impasse in any metaethical consideration, that we can explain bestiality, necrophilia, incestuous relationships as being wrong even without God. And so what I find is that on every level that homosexuality is non-harmful in principle and has only made both my life and the life of many other people, as well as society, I think, better by embracing and providing a normative path for people to live happy, healthy lives. Because I find in these discussions around homosexuality, Catholics like to ground somebody's being hurt somewhere, or you're being hurt internally somewhere that we don't have access to, that people can't provide concrete examples of. It seems to be these vague gestures at like something's wrong out there. So maybe the easiest way to like parse through this is I'm going to put you in the driver's seat of trying to try to get me to believe differently about this issue, and feel free to ask the questions or try to make the points, because it seems like intuitively and in reality and when we look at the data that being pro-queer is only helpful both on a societal and an individual level.
So then thank you for that, Cade. I mean, we can start with this. So I think that it's important to consider where the burden of proof is, right? So when we are making the proposition that homosexual acts are okay, or homosexual acts are, you know, good for society, good for people's flourishing or whatever, or homosexuality or homosexual acts are wrong, these are propositions, and they demand evidence. So whether we are taking the position of, hey, homosexuality is okay, or it's bad, or it's good, we are making propositions, and so we would have the burden of proof on our side. So we don't just simply say, oh, because the majority of the people in our 21st century kind of Western society accepts homosexuality, therefore we're gonna, you know, point to the conservative Christian or whoever it is to say, hey, you guys have the burden of proof. And I'm not saying that you're saying that in particular, but just so that people are aware that that's not where we should be reasoning. Moreover, if we do appeal to, ad populum, we can consider something that G.K. Chesterton, the great writer, said, which is, the democracy of the dead. So the majority of people in history, including those who are dead, consider that homosexuality or homosexual acts are wrong, or there's something that is limiting about it at least. And so, I mean, if we're going to appeal to the people, then it seems like it's going to lean more towards this sort of Christian realm, or possibly even a non-Christian realm, more specifically, where it's just we're considering the merits or the non-merits of homosexual acts itself. So, I mean, I would say that, for example, what are certain pieces of evidence that you would say that would make homosexual acts, okay, or or good, or however you want to use it? Because it seems to me like the majority of the arguments that you've had possibly on this topic is like a sort of reply. So Trent Horn says something, Joe Heschmeyer says something, and then you're replying to it, right? As if the Catholic has a burden of proof. The Catholic is, and one can interpret this, not necessarily what you're claiming. One can interpret, it seems like then the Catholic always has this commitment to natural law theory, the argument from the perverted faculty argument kind of idea, where I'm seeing, actually, can we see if there's a switch around the other way where we don't just simply presuppose that homosexual acts should be allowed in society, is good, quote unquote, or is okay. But let's see, do we actually have evidence for that? And of course, I can get to my side as well if you'd like to show,
Yeah, so on the burden of proof, I think it does absolutely fall on the shoulders of Catholics, because it's homosexual orientations are natural, stable, they're non-harmful, they're protected by the government and constitutional rights. And both in every data point that I've seen in real life, it seems to only be advantageous to have a affirming environment. And in many ways, I think the burden of proof does fall on the Catholic, because I've lived this. I've looked at the data more, and I've looked more at the philosophy than nearly any Catholic that comes to talk to me about this. So I think the burden of proof is absolutely out there. And on the democracy of the dead, if we say in a Western context, circa 500 years ago, what would people think? I don't know. Historically, we've had a number of societies which have not followed kind of the Catholic sexual ethic by any means, and have been in some ways much more promiscuous in how they live out in society. And so, like, how would I start building the positive case for homosexuality is that, I think people being born this way, or people having both natural and permanent same-sex attraction, first, it doesn't prove that it's okay in of itself, but it makes us confront the data, which is to say that, like, homosexuality isn't a fad. It's not something that people choose. It's something that is innate, and that innateness is what makes us kind of like, so we have to confront this from a societal level. So then we move into, like, the pro level, which is if we have a homophobic environment, or let's say a non-affirming environment, to get away from loaded terms, all of the long-term data points to being in a non-supportive environment leads to worse mental health outcomes, leads to loneliness, leads to singleness or mandatory celibacy, leads to suicide. We know that people don't flourish inside of these repressive systems. And on the opposite side, we know that from the data out there that affirming environment is the best predictor of somebody's well-being who is forced to confront the fact that they are gender non-conforming or non-heterosexual orientation in marriage, and that people live happy, healthy lives that and happen to be gay or bi or trans or queer, like whatever label we want to throw in there, that it seems to only help people's lives to embrace that identity, to live in healthy ways, and to have an affirming environment around them. So like I said, the innateness and the stability makes us confront like what to do. And if we only have a few options that are on the table, if we have to take action, we know statistically speaking one side leads to harm and one side leads to flourishing. And so it seems only intuitive to go to, hey, we want people to live the best possible lives. Not in this like hedonistic way, but both on a societal and an interpersonal long-term way. It seems like being gay is pretty dope. I think is what I'd throw on the bumper sticker.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that, Cade. So seems like burden of proof on Catholic, and I would say, well, I mean, you did, provide pieces of evidence, and providing pieces of evidence does not necessarily mean that a claim or the conclusion is true, but you provided evidence for your burden of proof. And the reason I'm so insistent on, those who are holding to the proposition, homosexual acts are okay, or homosexual acts are good, or they're non-harmful, they lead to happiness. These are propositions, and naturally, if we learn this in Logic 101, propositions, we should provide proofs for them. And so, absolutely, the burden of proof is still on your side. But we don't have to stay over there, because you did, try to provide certain pieces of evidence. So you mentioned, for example, so homosexual acts, that kind of lifestyle, homosexuality, it's naturally stable, non-harmful, protected by government, and it's only advantageous. So consider, for example, I want to try this. I haven't really thought about this too much, but I mean, consider, for example, slavery, right? So like slavery back then, where in this possible world where there's slavery back then, we find that somehow the slaves actually enjoy being enslaved, okay, in the kind of American slavery way, not just some kind of indentured servitude or something. So they're being, terribly whipped, they're working long hours outside, but for whatever reason, the pain is not the same as, in our world. So in this kind of understanding, it seems like it's not exactly harmful. The slaves are willing to go with it and say it's protected by the government as well. And both sides, the master and the slave, they're willing to commit to this. Okay, so they just continue with that. Plus, okay, if we free the slaves, what about like how they get jobs and how they're going to start learning from the very beginning? It seems like, okay, with these slaves, at least they're gonna get some kind of food, some kind of shelter. So probably not. I don't think these are ideal conditions. But in this possible world where slavery, real slavery, as similar to American slavery, is happening, could we say that because this is not harmful, that it's somehow advantageous in the sense that these two sides are willing to commit to these ends? The slave is going to pick the cotton, and the master is going to rule the slave. Could we say that this kind of slavery is okay, or would you say that this kind of slavery is intrinsically wrong? And I know that you probably hold to the view that it's not. There's no such a thing as things being intrinsically wrong. If you could expound on that and provide evidence why you hold to that claim.
Yeah, so it sounds like you just described like an employee-employer relationship, right? You kept using this language of willing to commit if it didn't cause harm, right? Like if it didn't cause harm, like it didn't cause harm. Like it seems tautological to go to like cook up a hypothetical. And so this is what I find endlessly frustrating about these homosexuality conversations is like they quickly get abstracted to like these grave metaethical concerns out there somewhere in the ether, and somehow to have an intelligent conversation around homosexuality, like we have to cook up these hypotheticals that are out there. I mean, yeah, owning people is wrong, full stop. I don't see where that's going, nor how that relates to homosexuality. Because, like, at a certain point, we have to inhabit the dialectic of the people that are having this conversation. It seems like the data points that homosexual orientations are natural and stable, which makes us confront what to do. And if the options on the table are some spectrum of either being affirming or non-affirming, it seems like the data of human flourishing is drastically towards the side of affirming. And in many ways, like in my Joe Heschmeyer debate, he's like, well, like it's a post-Enlightenment idea of like human flourishing. It's like, yes, I am fine admitting that like my axiom is I want people to live happy, healthy lives. Like if we can't agree on that and like proceed the conversation from there, like I'm fine with people knowing my fundamental presupposition is like I want people to be happy in a healthy society. It's kind of my shot at an interesting hypothetical.
Yeah, thank you for that, Cade. I think you mentioned, okay, so I wasn't too sure where you were going with this, but you mentioned, okay, if slavery did not cause harm, I was wondering, like, would you say that's okay or not? Later on, you did say owning people is wrong, full stop. So even in this case where it's not causing harm, both parties are really committed, the man is really picking cotton and all the rest, and we're still recognizing as slavery, you would say that it's just wrong, full stop. So I mean, the reason that I bring this up, this sort of possible kind of thought experiment in the first place was not, to provide like hey, you have to absolutely be dragged to this, I guess, I mean, I don't accept, for example, emotivism. So, I mean, there's going to be some kind of discussion, I would imagine, about that. I mean, we do get dragged pretty far from the particular, but we could discuss the particular. I would say that what this shows is with your original kind of claims as to why homosexuality was okay or good, I don't know how you would describe it still, was naturally stable, non-harmful, protected by government, only advantageous. So in that sort of possible world that I described, that possible slavery world that I described, it basically fulfilled all these conditions, and we recognize it as slavery. And yet, your claim was, yet owning people is wrong, full stop. So in that, even in, I would presume in that possible slavery world I was talking about, owning people there would also be wrong, even though it's naturally stable, non-harmful, protected by government, only advantageous, which were all the conditions that you mentioned as to why homosexual acts would be okay.
I mean, yeah, if we define slavery as a optional consensual contract that people can enter into insofar as it doesn't hurt people and only leads to human flourishing, then like, yeah, and also like if we defined this pen as a monster truck, then like I'm holding a monster truck. Like, right, if we fundamentally redefine all of the words that we're using, yes, you can get somebody to sort of gotcha with the term slavery, but it sounds like in this hypothetical you just described employment under a capitalist system at best. Yeah, I'd be more interested to diving into maybe, do you think, as the Catechism says, that there's a non-negligible number of people with homosexual attractions, and we're forced to confront the reality that people have lifelong attractions to members of the same sex? Do we have agreement there?
Yeah, definitely. I affirm everything that the Catechism says. And I would like to start first. I mean, I realize, a lot of this has been really philosophical, but I definitely recognize the deep, struggles of all kinds of human beings, heterosexuals who struggle with pornography, masturbation, and all the rest, and those who are, committing same-sex sexual acts and all the rest. I recognize that very deep pastoral emotional concern. First and foremost, in my day-to-day, if I'm out evangelizing, I'm not speaking this fast. I'm not speaking with Kate right here. I think Kate is, somewhat of an intellectual, to say the least. So that's why I'm speaking in this more philosophical way. But I do want to slow down and recognize that I love people. I love everyone, including those who struggle with homosexual attraction. Whether you use that word struggle or not, I recognize what the Catechism says, and yet I want you to know that I love you very much, and that's the reality of it.
Yeah. So we're in agreement that there are a non-negligible number of people that were forced to confront this reality in society. And what it seems like, according to the vast majority of scholarship, as well as the vast majority of anecdotes and lived experiences, is that when people live in an open, accepting, and affirming environment, they do better by nearly every metric that we could conceivably measure, both self-reported and objective. And what I find is that Catholics on this issue tend to abstract the harm to this ethereal, non-obvious, non-intuitive, uninvestigatable fig Newton of our imagination that somewhere harm is being caused by somebody being gay. And that doesn't seem borne out in the data. And even if it was borne out in the data, it still seems like we have the even bigger elephant in the room, which is choice. Right? Like there's two big discussions here, right? One's the societal level. What are the things that we allow people to do within society? And for example, like, I don't smoke and I think smoking's terrible. But would I make it illegal? No. But would I tell somebody around me who's considering smoking or drinking? I would tell them no, but I'd still allow it to be legal. And so it seems both on a societal and on an individual level, the data is that society and people do better when homosexuality is a stable, societally recognized institution.
Thank you for that, Cade. Let's see. So, various points right there. You mentioned the vast amount of scholarship. When people live in an open and accepting environment, they do better. I'm not exactly sure what the scholarship is. Honestly, I'm more interested in the philosophical kind of questions because I'm sure you have done your research. I mean, at least one of the things that I can mention is apparently they're having certain researches showing that, hey, in homosexual acts, people tend to receive AIDS and all that more. But like, okay, what does that really do? I guess that's one harm if you're not, using proper protection, getting tests and all the rest. I know there are certain things that you can do, to really make sure that you have safe sex. You mentioned Catholics tend to abstract, to this otherworldly realm of how homosexuality is wrong. Well, I don't know how Catholics do it really, but I just really want to do it the way that is philosophically sound. I mean, we can say, for example, the same with certain atheists or certain non-theists who tend to abstract to this other realm of how certain things are wrong or certain things are right. Okay, people do certain things and that's up to them. You mentioned even if homosexuality is wrong, we still have a choice. Okay, well, specifically in the Catholic realm, and this is my claim as well, it's morally wrong. So it's disanalogous to the smoking example. In the smoking example, it's unhealthy. So it's not morally wrong. It's not like smoking is immoral or anything. I think smoking is very unhealthy, and actually, sadly, I know one friend who may be, well, he does smoke a lot. I'm not sure if he's addicted. So God bless him. I pray for him. He's trying, I guess. But it's not immoral. And so the government can allow that, and people have the choice to do what they want. Whereas with my claim, which is that same-sex sexual acts, they are morally wrong. The government should not provide protection. And it seems like we sort of just been going around on this realm. I can bring forth certain arguments that I think would work. Mm-hmm. And I'm very modest, by the way. Just to be clear, I'm not exactly convinced by the what is the name? By the perverted faculty argument that many people bring up, so like Ed Fazer and certain people. I'm not exactly sure if I'm convinced on the aspect yet. And actually, another prominent philosopher, Catholic as well, he is also not very much convinced entirely, at least generally speaking. So, it's not like you have to be committed to that to show that same-sex sexual acts are wrong. For example, you don't even have to be a Catholic. You could just be a general Christian, or like I mentioned, a non-theist. And think about another argument that would show same-sex sexual acts are wrong. And so I have two arguments lined up if you would like to give it a listen.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, okay. So to start off with, consider, for example, premise number one, same-sex and opposite sex sexual relationships are on par. Like, that's something that we would agree with, okay? I think a lot of people would agree with that. Second...
Are or aren't on par?
On par. So...
Okay.
PAR, yeah. Then number two, the second premise is heterosexuality, homosexuality, and bisexuality are on par. So, hey, they're just on the same level. And persons of one orientation do not have reason to try to change to another. I'm going to try to really summarize and do justice to this argument. But basically, this is, once again, from Dr. Alexander Proust, a Catholic, PhD, philosophy, PhD, mathematics. Okay, I don't know why I'm mentioning that. But he's super awesome, right? From Biola University. Essentially, I'm going to try to summarize. Consider that we have George, okay? And George is only attracted to Albanians, okay? He's not attracted to anything else. Albanians? So, or you can just switch it out for a race. So George is only attracted to like Koreans. He's only attracted to red-haired people. He's only attracted to so I don't know, just name it. He's only attracted to that particular group. Would we say that there's something wrong or limited or suboptimal, not quite right with George? So consider this like really deeply. Like, okay, this George guy, he likes, it could be male or female. It could be, all kinds of personalities, but specifically Albanian or specifically Asian. That seems like it's very limiting. It's suboptimal because presumably, like having an attraction towards a black person, a white person, it doesn't make it superior or less than liking an Asian person or liking an Albanian. So the fact of the matter here is there's something strange here, suboptimal, something not quite right. And, maybe one objection is, well, Minh, George just has a kind of preference. So he has a preference towards Albanians or he has a preference towards Asians. Well, I'm not talking about preference, though. Alexander Proust is not talking about preference. He's talking about the orientation of George is such that he only likes Albanians or he only likes Asian and no other group, right? So there's no sexual attraction to any other group. There's something limiting or suboptimal about that. And so consider, for example, heterosexuals. The heterosexual man and the homosexual woman only likes or is only attracted to women. Or consider the homosexual man and the heterosexual woman only being attracted to the man. There's something limiting, suboptimal, and not quite right there, as in the case with George, right? So like, hey, why don't you just expand your options? Because liking a man, liking a woman, liking an Asian, liking a non-Asian, liking a white person, liking a black person, they should be on par. And yet, when the sexual orientation is such that it's limited to one category only, it seems like suboptimal, not quite right. And so, going back to the original claim, actually, it seems like we have to deny premise number one, to remind, is same-sex and opposite sexual relationships are on par. Actually, I want to get to that eventually, right? But number two, actually, heterosexuality, homosexuality, and bisexuality are on par. Actually, that's not true. When we just reason, that whole line of reason that we just went through, that shows that bisexuality actually is less limiting, right? So if George, who only likes Albanians, he could take a pill to like Asians, to like white people, to like all black people, whatever it may be, he should take that pill, presumably if there are no side effects, so that he's not, in this suboptimal, in this kind of not quite right way. And so, likewise, with the heterosexual person, with the homosexual person, to be more unlimited, or probably not more unlimited, but to not be so limited, they should, try to see if they can become bisexual. And so there should be a reason to change to bisexuality, because it's less limiting, it's less suboptimal, it's the options are expanded. So that's the argument that Proust brings forth, and I tried to do justice to it, trying to summarize with my own words. So let me know if I miss a point or two, or clarification is needed, or if you have any objections.
So I'm writing this down. What's the end so what? Is the end, or the so what of it, people should have more expansive views of sexuality and gender?
Okay, so my fault for man. Yeah. This is definitely a butcher, but the basic point is, when we have heterosexuality and homosexuality not being ideal, and it itself being limited, not quite right, suboptimal, if there's a pill for this heterosexual person to be bisexual, he should take that. Presumably no side effects. Why? Because he's going to be, quote unquote, more right. He's going to be not suboptimal. He's not going to be limited in just this one group of heterosexual kind of sexual attraction. Just like the case of George, right? The case of George is like, he only likes Albanians. Like, what? Why do you only like Albanians? And it's not just a preface. Somehow deep within George, he only likes Albanians. He cannot like, others like Asians. He cannot like anything like that. Okay, there's something not quite right about that. And so, actually, we go back to we see that premise number 2 is actually false, right? So heterosexuality or homosexual persons, heterosexual persons and bisexual persons, it's not on par, or sorry, at least the sexuality itself, not the person. These 3 categories, they're not on par, because the bisexual person does have reasons to try to change the homosexual person, does have reasons to change the heterosexual person to be bisexual, because bisexuality is more freeing, if you want to say it like that, because it's less limited, it's less suboptimal. And so what happens then is, do we want to commit ourselves to that claim that bisexuality is actually more ideal than homosexuality and heterosexuality? Most people are going to say no. But here's where, Proust is like a sort of gotcha. He's really awesome with this. But if you say no, you're not going to commit yourself to it, then something is wrong with either homosexuality or heterosexuality. And at least with most people, they're going to be very committed to saying, hey, heterosexuality is not wrong. So sadly, goodbye, homosexuality. That's going to be the wrong part right there. Or it's not on par, right? So you can see, like, oh man, it's just so much.
So the argument is pro bisexuality, is like,
if we want to accept that that bullet, yes. Proust is basically saying people are not going to want to accept that. They're not going to want to say that bisexuality somehow is better or superior to homosexuality or heterosexuality. But if you don't want that conclusion, then you have to deny premise number 1, which is same-sex and opposite-sex relationships are on par. You have to deny something there. And what do you deny? What you take out is not the heterosexuality part, because that is definitely okay. I mean, homosexuals will say the same. It's definitely okay. So then you have to take out the other element, which is the homosexual part. And so homosexuality is not on par with heterosexuality. So that's the basic conclusion.
Oh, so the argument is essentially, if we grant the initial premises, then we're stuck with these entailments that we don't like, so something must be wrong with... Okay, the language is going to come down to on par, right? Like, is better than... are obviously going to be different claims. Like, if our measure for sexuality is who has the most available sexual partners, then, like, our bisexual kings out there certainly are going to have more options. And if we lived in a society in which the only thing that we optimized for was a total available sexual partners, then yes, then bisexuals are kinks. But I don't think that's what people mean when they say same-sex and opposite-sex relations are on par. Because in a certain sense, I would bite the bullet that I want to live in a society in which sexual norms among adults are more open, are there for more negotiation, can be nuanced over time. So I'm gonna on par, and is bisexuality preferable? Like in a certain sense, yes, but also that's not the sense in which I argue for same-sex and opposite-sex relations being on par. Because obviously same-sex and opposite-sex relations are not exactly the same thing because there's a naming convention that's different. I think what people mean with on par is whether it's moral weight or societal recognition or statistical harm or how you treat the dignity of somebody's relationship, I think is what they mean by on par, not best for quickly scrolling through Tinder for the most number of hookups.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. And that's a great objection. I think this is one of the big things that one can bring up. And of course, Alexander Proust, what do you know? He predicted it. He basically says, yeah, well, in basically one of, you can see it, like this is public in his blog. One of the guys basically brought up, hey, Proust, what about the unclarity that we have on par, like maybe reproduction wise, or just the unlimited options, more freedom in the options. Okay. Proust says, well, the vague definition of on par that I gave involved a conjunction of features. It seems difficult to hold that both the relationships and orientations are on par in respect of all these features. So let's see. Okay, he continues. I think the point is a little bit more than pragmatic. There's something wrong with George, right? So like something suboptimal, not quite right with George. He is being held back from human flourishing through an irrational limitation on his relationships. Like, hey, George, why is it only Albanians? Why not black people? Why not white people? Why not Asian people? Why Albanians? What's going on with you, right? So, I mean, obviously, if this is something he was born with and he didn't choose, there's nothing, we wouldn't say that's like morally wrong on his part, say, for example. But there's just still something wrong with George here. So Proust continues, think of something closer to a real life case. So he says, I had an Asian student say in class how annoying it was that there were all these men from the context, I assume white men, who were interested in her solely because she was Asian, right? So like that's a real kind of phenomenon that one can see. Like, why is it that there are certain white men, I'm not saying obviously all white men, right? I love white people, I love all kinds of people, but this sort of phenomenon where it seems like almost as if this girl is right, which I don't think she is, at least always, why is it that there are certain white men, some white men, who seemingly are so attracted to women and possibly only attracted to Asian women? There's something strange about that. Like, hey, what about white women? What about black women? I know one can have a preference, but why only that group? And if we have that case where George only likes Albanians, like he cannot like any other race, when liking other races are actually on par, there's something wrong with George. And so too, if we say that, homosexual liking is just this one category, and then heterosexual liking is this other category, and then bisexual encompasses both, there's something, if we go with the same logic, there's something wrong with the heterosexual. There's something wrong with the homosexual. So let's take that pill and become bisexual, right? So that the options are expanded. So that's the basic analogy as to why, George was brought up in the first place, to show that there's something suboptimal about this, not quite right. And the basic point is we want to keep our intuition that actually bisexuality is not superior to homosexuality. It's not superior to heterosexuality. But if we want to keep that intuition, then premise one is false, which was let me read it specifically, same-sex and opposite-sex, premise two would be false, right? So like homosexuality, heterosexuality, and bisexuality are on par. They're not on par. But if we want to reject that, we reject number one, which says same-sex and opposite-sex sexual relationships are on par. They are actually not on par. We're going to have to take one of them away. Is it same-sex sexual relationships that are, not as favorable, or is it the opposite-sex one that is not as favorable? One of them has to go, and our stronger intuition is that opposite-sex sexual relationships are at least okay. They are good to some people. And so the other one that has to go is, okay, goodbye same-sex sexual relationships, because that one would have to be suboptimal.
Yeah, so this is not the direction that I think I've ever seen an apologist go down. So kudos to you for finding something new, instead of most apologists find something cooked up so long ago that it's well trodden.
Aquinas said this.
Yeah, yeah, it's precisely that. This is a conversation that on the connection between kinks, fetishes, orientations, societal and systemic racism. Like this, this reads like something out of like a 200 level like gender theory class. Which I find fascinating, and also a conversation that I don't think I've ever seen a Catholic go down. So a few things. One, I think the syllogism breaks down with definitions of sex and gender, as well as with orientation, right? Sex, gender, and orientation are all these vague amalgamations of societal distribution on essentially graphs, right? Sex is bimodal. Gender in some way is more than bimodal and closer to a spectrum, but yet still tends to congregate around things. And then orientation seems to be like a step above that in vagueness. And I think also a particular fetish or kink around a race is not quite as stable, is not quite as widespread. It doesn't necessarily make us confront a fact, and is different insofar as you might have like an interpersonal therapeutic approach to somebody with let's say somebody attracted just to Albanians. But then I think the bigger question is like, if your friend who's only attracted to a particular race ends up in a relationship with somebody of that particular race, you're not going to treat them differently, right? Like we have societal recognition of a relationship for heterosexuality. We don't in the same way for homosexuality. And that it seems like even if my friend is only attracted to a particular race, I'm going to still treat their rights, their societal recognition of the relationship in the same way as if they had found a different race. And on your line of wanting to keep our intuitions seems to be quelled as soon as like we wade into the realm of gender abolitionism, which I feel like is a conversation that most faithful Catholics aren't willing to like parse out a discussion on gender abolitionism. But and so same-sex versus opposite relationships are on par. They're different. I think what people mean with on par, and maybe my argument for them being on par, is that I'm going to treat the final results of somebody's, let's say, dating the same, regardless of gender and of race. That being straight, being gay, and being bisexual are on par. They're different. I also think, a big practical nuance of this thing is that, in a certain sense, bisexual folks don't report having more sexual partners because there's both a confluence of straight women who aren't willing to be with them, as well as a certain chunk of people of the same gender who would be with them that won't be with them. And so in certain ways, once we admit like bi erasure into this conversation, like that premise seems to break down. And also on a pragmatic route, like we don't see the stability or the prevalence of a fetish for a particular race as we do with an orientation towards a particular sex or gender. Is kind of how I'd parse through that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. I'm not gonna lie, this argument I had to sit through, I think hours, literally hours, just to finally understand this. So kudos to you, for being here with me. Okay, but let me try this other way. After still probably not understanding the full thing. Proust is a genius for this. Consider this. Okay, you have George. Mm-hmm. He likes Albanians only. There are these other options. Like he can like any other race, Asian. He can like whites. His liking of these other races, or other people liking whites, other people liking blacks, other people liking Asians, they are on par with George liking Albanians. But it's the fact that George can only be attracted to Albanians that is the problem. That is exactly where things go wrong. Why is it that he cannot be attracted to Asians or blacks or white? And so too, consider the heterosexual. He's attracted only to but if we want to keep that claim that liking another person of the same sex is on par with this heterosexual liking the female only, then it would be analogous to the case of George. That's exactly where we're trying to go with this, right? I don't know how to really explain this. I'm just trying to. So you see that there are these categories. It would be helpful if we had some visuals. But you have these categories, and when there's a limiting in just that one category, there's something wrong with George. There's something wrong with either the homosexual or the heterosexual. But we also don't want to say that there's anything wrong with them. And so we're going to have to take one of the premises away. But if we take one of the premises away, we're going to have to accept the other premise. that we don't want. And so ultimately, we're gonna strip away to certain premises until we finally get to this really deep-seated, claim that I think even homosexuals make, which is heterosexual acts are okay, or at least is good. And so we have to remove this other claim in premise number 1, which was homosexual orientation is on the same level, is on par with heterosexual orientation. Did that help at all? Or maybe we could just jump to the second argument if this is still confusing.
Yeah, so I still think, regardless of how you play out this argument, the question still is, so like, what do we do with George, right? Do we, even if George is just attracted to Albanians, which, two things there. One, I think a particular fetish for a race and an orientation towards a gender are disanalogous in that fetishization is not as stable and not even close to as stable as an attraction towards the same gender, right? Like we know through therapeutic interventions that in a certain sense somebody can be changed of their fetish of a particular race. And that if we were to make an argument, if I'm talking to George over like, maybe we should have a conversation around this, is like, one, to your earlier point, in a certain sense it does harm him because he's only going on the dating app just for Albanians, which I think would be a weird thing. And so his options are limited. But also if he finds one Albanian, then he's happy, right? I think in dating, like unlike other games of chance or sports out there, you don't play the game forever. Like you can knock the ball out of the park when you find a particular spouse, and you don't have to go to bat again. It also harms her because if whoever he's with, the Albanian, to fetishize somebody's race and to only be in there not because you care about them, but because there's a particular fetishization of their race. Like we have a much clearer ability to point to harm than we do with a loving, caring, consensual, long-term, stable homosexual relationship. And so for that reason, I don't think they're analogous for those particular reasons, and don't ultimately lead us to a conclusion, because still at the end of the day, we're still faced with, so what do we do with George, right? Do we shame George? Do we, if he finds eventually an Albanian that he loves, some supermodel, do we shame him for that? The answer is like, no. So what do we do with George? It seems like we go, awesome, man, I hope you find somebody that you're happy with. Seems like the so what of that. And so it seems like we've parsed through argument 1. Let's flip the page then on argument 2 against homosexuality. If you want to touch on any last things, otherwise I think let's move into 2 to see how that one plays out.
Sure, yeah. Let's see, is there anything worthy? I say one thing, at least with the claim of it being harmful to him, I'm not exactly sure. So you said, for example, it's weird that George is going on, he's looking for specifically Albanians and not Asians, not blacks, not whites on the dating app, and so it's harmful to him. I find that hard to, really, like, what evidence is there for that claim? It's weird, but somehow it's harmful. That seems like it's a jump for me. And somehow it harms the woman as well because George doesn't care about her, but only the race. Well, consider, for example, George finally comes to know this girl. Maybe his initial kind of understanding was, hey, this is an Albanian chick, so I want to get with her. But then eventually he actually develops like emotional connections and all the rest. And so he actually does care about her in the end. And so do we want to break off this kind of relationship? Is it actually harmful anymore? It doesn't really harm the woman if, for example, it's, okay, George is like, hey, I really like Albanians. This is one Albanian, so I'm going to treat this Albanian really well. And so show my care for her. There's nothing wrong with, so like the showing of care to the Albanian is not mutually exclusive to him specifically looking for Albanians. Him looking for Albanians is like something that's prior to him actually getting with this one chick. And obviously, I don't think that, like I mentioned, we don't exactly shame George. Just like, for example, we don't shame homosexuals, like, condemn them and, not show a kind of loving attitude. We should love everybody. There's a kind of guilt that I think does come with all kinds of people, even heterosexuals who are addicted to pornography or whatever. A kind of guilt can be a godly guilt. 2 Corinthians 7 verse 10 shows there's a guilt that leads to death, and then there's a guilt that leads to repentance. So guilt, shame, I think that these can be uses for, bettering our lives, but we don't just shame a person per se. We don't just simply do that out of hate or anything, out of spite. So that's what I would say, if you would like.
And maybe like this will get clarity here. Like, I'm okay if George finds an Albanian and only wants to date Albanians, right? Like I'm not interested either in a personal, like, pragmatic way, or especially let alone on a societal level, like getting George to change, right? To your point, if he finds a relationship that he's happy in, she is aware of what's happening, and they get to know each other. Like I think I'd be happy for him, right, at the end of the day. So when I talk about there's potential for harm here, right? It's going to depend on the circumstance. But there's a lot of things that the many men report only wanting to be with a blonde or only with a brunette, and I think there's some pragmatic considerations. But if I have a friend who only likes blondes and eventually finds a blonde, like I'm not going to have this categorical, intrinsic evil language around them being with somebody to whom they're attracted in a particular way. And to your point on shaming or condemning, I mean, we do, and even the most PR-trained Catholic still condemns homosexuality, because in George's situation, he would be fine to find a spouse who's Albanian. In a Catholic context, a man who's attracted to another man still cannot find any love with somebody to whom they're attracted. They are condemned to a life of mandatory celibacy, and so they are condemned. I find this breaks down beyond like a pragmatic concern and like a situation that you might have, or a conversation you might have with your therapist or like your women's studies professor. So let's maybe move into two here, because I think we've exhausted that one.
Sure.
What would kind of be the second argument that you wanted to hit on homosexuality?
And there's a reason I sighed right there, because I realized I made a mistake. This is actually an even more confusing argument than the first one. I should have started with this one. But, okay, let's see what we can do. Okay, so note number one, we're going to start first with certain assumptions. And once again, lo and behold, this is from Dr. Alexander Proust himself. All props to him, okay? So this is not me being innovative or anything. I'm just like, let me sit here for hours trying to understand this, and when I understand it, I'm going to stick to it. That's cool. Okay, number one, the assumption is that sex is a deeply humanly significant good. Okay, it's like, why I think so? I forgot where I got this from. Probably his book, One Body. The basic reason is, hey, that's probably why we go into the room, and that's when the sex happens. That's also why, we're a little bit more this is from my understanding, right? Why we are a little bit more discreet about it. So it's like, hey, I really want this partner, and so I'm not gonna just blurt it out for no reason at all. I'm not just gonna go crazy with it as in like a daily talk or about another subject. But basically, I think that's an uncontroversial kind of assumption. Yeah, sex is a deeply humanly significant good. Another assumption, deeply humanly significant, independent of sex. Good, independent good. I should rephrase that. It's a deeply humanly significant independent good, which is the complete striving of a biological whole in uncontracepted heterosexual intercourse. So those are certain things that we're going to go off of. And of course, that second premise is more controversial than the first one, lo and behold.
Can you reread two? I have one down. Two, there's a few points. What would kind of be the distillation of that?
So two would be deeply humanly significant independent good of sex equals the complete striving of a biological whole in uncontracepted heterosexual intercourse. That's that. And then here's basically the argument as to really where Proust goes. Okay, so premise one, each kind of deeply humanly significant pleasure is a way of affecting, relating to an independent, deeply humanly significant kind of good in which the pleasure is taken. Oh my goodness, that's the first premise. Okay, let me explain. Basically, in my understanding, the significant pleasure is taken in something good, not something empty, right? So one of the so like, you don't just take pleasure in anything. Okay, Bob is down in the basement, he's taking pleasure in torturing the baby for fun. No, that's not the pleasure that is good. That's a pleasure that Proust would call, for example, empty, according to my understanding of him. I don't want to straw man him, right? So that's a basic Minh summary. Significant pleasure is taken in something good, not something empty. Seems uncontroversial. And as shown by the Bob example, and just name any other example. Okay. Premise two, there is no deeply humanly significant good in same-sex sexual activity when the couple takes no pleasure in the activity. Okay, so that's the premise. So Minh summary once again. If there is no pleasure in same-sex sexual activity, then there is no deeply humanly significant good in same-sex sexual activity. Okay, so that's going to be very controversial because some people might say, actually, no, there's something deeply humanly significantly good in this homosexual act because of this psychological union, not just the pleasure. But I would say that one way to Okay, let me just table that because it's fairly long, right? I have an answer to that. But third premise, climactic sexual pleasure is deeply humanly significant. Min summary, climax is significant, right? We think about that. Fourth, climactic sexual pleasure is a pleasure taken in sexual activity. That's proofs. Min summary, the climax is only significant because it is the climax of the good of sexual activity. So when we're asking, why is this sexual activity of these two homosexuals good? We might say, well, it's because of the climax of, this pleasure. But the problem here, as we continue in premise 5, okay, I'm not even going to read what Prue says here because he talks about P and G and all the rest. Let me just give my summary. The pleasure of climax comes from the good of sexual activity. So, it helps to have visuals, right? So, originally we were claiming homosexual activity is good because of the climax of pleasure, and yet the pleasure of climax only comes from the good of sexual activity. So if the pleasure of climax fails to come from the good of sexual activity, then the pleasure of climax is empty. So essentially, if you don't have this pleasure of climax, sexual act that one is doing, it's empty. Well, empty, if we remember that Bob situation, it's not the same, but it would be analogous in that pleasure is taken in something good, but if there's nothing good about the homosexual act other than the climax of pleasure, or just pleasure in general, then that pleasure is empty. Premise 6, it is wrong to deliberately induce an instance of deeply humanly significant kind of pleasure when the instance is empty. At this point, I think I'm just going to summarize. If the pleasure of climax is empty, then it is wrong to deliberately induce the pleasure of climax, right? So if I did not have that pleasure of climax, and I'm trying to, I'm deliberately trying to induce that pleasure of climax through the homosexual activity, that would be wrong because I'm trying to take pleasure in something that is empty. Something similar to Bob trying to take pleasure in something that's empty with torturing the baby for fun. Okay, here's the big premise, okay? Premise 7, from my summary. Big problem for same-sex sexual activity. If same-sex sexual activity has no significant good when done pleasurelessly, then same-sex sexual activity is empty. Similar to how if Bob, torturing the baby for fun, has no significant good when he's doing that pleasurelessly, then that very act of torturing the baby would be empty. And so it's wrong. Premise 8, therefore same-sex sexual activity fails to realize an instance of an independently, deeply, humanly significant kind of good. It follows by premise 2 and premise 7. Therefore, taking climactic sexual pleasure in sexual activity is empty when the partners are of the same sex, okay? Because the sexual activity is empty when you don't have this kind of climactic sexual pleasure. 10, therefore, climactic sexual pleasure between partners of the same sex is empty, follows by premise 4 and premise 9. Premise 11, it is wrong to deliberately induce climactic sexual pleasure when between partners of the same sex, by 3, 6, and 10 premises. And yes, that's the argument.
He filled up a few pages of notes here. So I think so much of both of these arguments are unironically solved by taking a gender theory class at your local liberal arts college with a bunch of blue-haired feminists. So much of these assumptions it's this weird way where I feel like he's listening to whispers of gender abolitionism without actually investing. So let me put it this way. One, I think all of this is still going to rely on the fact of this seems like the perverted faculty argument just with extra steps and a hint of a turncoat gender abolitionist, meaning we're still presupposing ends of the sexual act and this view of the sexual act as having independent ontology from what it is that we make it to be. And so I think a few things that are going to cut a line for this is that, one, sexuality and climax aren't the same. I think that sexuality is negotiated, it's variable, it's diverse, it takes a lot of different forms, is practiced in a lot of different ways. And that the relationship between sexuality, which is itself this huge bucket of different terms, and how in its relationship between let's say pleasure as well as the bonding of the people that are taking place, right? Connection and climax, or let me put it this way, of connection and pleasure are themselves so thoroughly negotiated that none of this seems concrete if we suppose those two things to be themselves diverse and shaky. And on, let's see, what is this, premise 3 in here, that we don't take pleasure in things that aren't real in a certain sense. I think we do. I think people take pleasure in a lot of things that are subjective, that are negotiated, that that aren't objective. I think there is significant good in both the straight and the gay sexual act. And before we even throw it down, like we're presupposing that sex is truly a binary and that sexual intercourse is a binary. So that seems to break down. It seems like there are goods both in pleasure and the connection of the spouses in homosexual activity. And that, I mean, all of this could, you can have both straight and gay sex without a climax to begin with. Yeah, it strikes me as... It strikes me as, yeah, just the perverted faculty argument with extra steps that doesn't take into the account. Yeah, I don't know. Those are a few stabs at it. It's endlessly puzzling because I think the response is a blue-haired feminist professor talking about gender abolitionism and a renegotiation of sexual norms, which I would be a fan of. So yeah, those are some points to throw back out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm not sure if I should mention this. Well, okay. Out of, knowing that there's this God who is watching over my conscience, I shall not mention it. So I'm going to keep you all in suspense as to what I'm holding back. But, and it's not anything wicked or anything, I guess, at least in how people understand it. Okay, so you mentioned sexuality and climax are not the same. Indeed, I agree. Yeah, that was not my claim in the beginning. You mentioned so there's also the connection in, say, homosexual activity and pleasure. So it seems like that's what you would be claiming, right? So, and of course, lo and behold, Proust predicted this in his book. So remember our beginning assumption was sex is a deeply humanly significant good.
I think it can be.
Okay. Would you say that in all cases it is, or for all human beings, it is a deeply humanly significant good? Is there a reason perhaps as to why? So for example, I would claim that even those who are celibate, sex would be a deeply humanly significant good for them.
I think some people do have sex casually and recreationally. And I think a lot of people do see it as this deeply and significant thing in their lives. So does the descriptive statement like sex is a deeply and significantly human good? Like I wouldn't disagree, but I don't think it's an exhaustive statement. I think sex for some people is purely recreational and fun in a way of blowing off steam without deep, significant, or profound meaning behind it. So I'm going to disagree with even premise one for a technical reason. Colloquially speaking, if somebody said that, would I say you're wrong? No. I think in this one, it's presupposing that is an exhaustive statement that sex or sexuality is always the case for everyone.
So I'm not considering, for example. Okay, actually, let me just see if I understand it properly. You mentioned that you would not disagree with the claim that sex is a deeply humanly significant good. Would you say that you don't disagree as in, for you, it is deeply humanly significant good? It is, such. But for other people, they can have a different view. They're like, man, I'm just having sex every day and it's just something that I do. It's like just a habit kind of idea. So for other people, they can have a different view. Okay. So is it more subjective? So you're like, hey, I agree with premise one only subjectively to me, but it's not like a universal claim for everyone.
If you put this into an empirical term, like statistically speaking, if you were to run a survey where the question was sex is, and then you either had option one, a oftentimes deep and significant human good, or two, purely fun and recreational, I think empirically the vast majority of people would respond that it is deep and significant. And so it's a non-exhaustive statement, but empirically speaking, I put it this way, if you put it into empirical terms, it's overwhelmingly right, but still not absolute.
Right, yeah. I think in that sort of comparison, so deeply significant on one side and the purely fun, of course, some people will pick just purely fun, but that's because they are put at the dilemma. For some people, it is deeply humanly significant precisely because it is fun. And so there's no dilemma in the first place. Like if you just put pretty purely fun for them, and that's precisely why it's deeply humanly significant for them. They're going to be like, yeah, heck yeah, that's why it's deeply humanly significant for me. That's why I do it every day, even nonchalantly. There's a kind of, just consider, for example, even water, right? So, like, we drink water, and I am dying of thirst right now with multiple bottles. With that, we would claim that that's a deeply humanly significant good, at least in the biological sense. Even if, for example, like if I had to choose between water or Coke, in a survey, I might just choose Coke. But not knowing that actually, yeah, obviously I'll still need water in my day to day. I still use water as an analogy to that sort of dilemma that you're posing. Like some people might think, oh yeah, purely fun, that's like the Coke, and it's I hope I still get that deeply humanly significant claim when I do this purely fun act. So for them, it's like a kind of merging. It's not a dilemma, if that makes sense. But honestly, like this is not too big of a premise that I think one has to really agree with. The basic points. Though I think you were mentioning at least connection, if you would like to go here. Connection. So Proust also mentioned this, right? There are basically, he mentions 3 candidates as to why if sex is a deeply humanly significant good, say for Kate or say for Minh, if that's the case, then there are 3 basically candidates, right? So one is like, hey, it's probably because of, as we mentioned in premise number 2, let me just get it, right? Because of the complete striving of a biological whole in contracepted heterosexual intercourse, or it could be in the realm of psychological connection or spiritual connection with the other person, which is probably similar to what you were mentioning, or it could be for pleasure. And basically, I think many people, as you were indicating earlier with the dilemma, like, is it purely fun? A lot of people would choose, yeah, sex is there for me because of the pleasure. But Proust is like saying, well, the problem here is sometimes sex doesn't have pleasure. It could be even painful. So, for example, women with, I think the word is dysorgasmia or something of that nature, where basically there's pain in orgasm among lesbian couples. Like, that's not pleasurable. But if that sex activity, so if we go back to it, right? So if this same-sex sexual activity has no significant good when done pleasurelessly, right? So in this case where there's dysorgasmia, then that same-sex sexual activity between the 2 lesbians is empty, because we have to look for why it is even a significant good to Minh or to that lesbian out there. But if the only reason is pleasure, and when it's done pleasurelessly, then where is the reason as to why that same-sex sexual act is even good in the first place? If pleasure in the first place taken in something good, right? So consider it like this. Once again, with the visuals, the lesbian has sex because of pleasure. She's like, hey, I want to do this because of pleasure. She realizes, actually, I have dysorgasmia. So what's the point of me going forward with this sex? There's no good point. There's no significant, humanly significant good anymore. And so that's number 1. And number 2, she could actually get more pleasure elsewhere. So perhaps, for example, this woman, she's more inclined to eating vanilla ice cream. And so she's like, hey, actually, I'm going to go out with my lesbian girlfriend and we're gonna have some ice cream. And actually the pleasure there is more intense, holding hands and then sunset, just name it, okay? It's actually more intense than her same-sex sexual activity in with her lesbian girlfriend. But that's actually where I think is a problem, because it seems like our intuition is actually sex should be something that is more deeply humanly significant than just merely holding ice cream and all the rest. That's why we put it in the category of romantic love. And whereas with the love of holding ice cream and having that sunset and sharing the ice cream, I mean, you can sort of just hold your cousin's hand. You can share ice cream with your cousin, or maybe your sibling, your mom, whoever it is, and look at the sunset like, wow, mom, thanks for bringing me here after my girlfriend broke up with me or something. That's a lot of pleasure. But seemingly romantic sex should be a more deeply humanly significant good than this this love between the mother and the child, or this love between the cousin and whoever it is out there. And so the basic point is pleasure can be had elsewhere. So pleasure is not essential to the sexual act. But if pleasure is not the essential thing to the sexual act, then when the homosexual engages in sexual activity and there is and it is done pleasurelessly, then that same-sex sexual act that he or she is committing to is empty. And if it's empty, one should not try to deliberately induce that kind of empty pleasure. Going back to Proust, yeah.
Yeah, once again, this is endlessly fascinating because this is what. This is exactly what you talk about in a gender and sexuality course. So a few things here. Once again, sex isn't a concrete term. Like, what is sex or what is sexuality or how do couples practice sexuality can be vastly different, and I think the Catholic worldview suffers from only seeing it as penetrative intercourse. There are disabled couples that have amazing sex lives, but yet don't penetrate the correct orifice that the church would put out there. Sometimes sexuality in some couples don't engage in certain things or do engage in different things, and what is considered sexual is in many ways negotiated and so diverse that anytime we see like the word sex in any of these syllogisms, we have like a pile of ill-defined leaves that we're like trying to hold together in the wind. So it may be addressing towards the end, where you're talking about what's the essential element of the sexual act, I would say is informed consent. Where like I'm not particularly interested in what a lesbian couple does or doesn't do, as long as we first have the condition of informed consent met. From like a societal level, on an interpersonal level, like there's going to be an element of harm and well-being that like we have in these conversations. But like sex being meaningful or not, the question becomes like according to who? Like I don't know this hypothetical lesbian couple that we're talking about, but we could just ask them why they do different things. And in pleasure, once again, there are so many different things that we mean by pleasure that I think in my own life, the pleasure that I get from eating a good meal is very different than the pleasure that I get from running 100 miles, is very different than the pleasure that I get from sex, is very different and completely disanalogous from the pleasure that I get from being with my family and friends. So pleasure itself has different types and meanings. And so and pleasure isn't just a pure utilitarian measurement of various hormones in the brain, because yes, like, can you have more oxytocin from ice cream than from pleasureless sex? Yes, but if we're looking at this idea that you put out there that like our intuition is that sex should be more meaningful than ice cream, in many ways is just that, like an assumption of how other people are to live. I think of people in an open relationship in which sex with somebody besides their partner is less meaningful than finishing the good TV show that they've been watching for weeks on end and want to watch the finale together. And so, yeah, I think as soon as we let gender abolitionism in here, as soon as we allow renegotiations of societal norms around sexuality, relationships, and the institutions that we build, all of this turns into soup, because these are, in many ways, these are real-life conversations that both myself and many other people have had, and I think that normal people have, or normal people's a loaded term, I think secular, or maybe even the broad term of non-Catholic couples, do have precisely all of these conversations that you're laying out. It seems like this only seems to be an argument in a Catholic sexual ethic by closing the doors to the outside world and then being forced to confront the same conversations that are endemic to the human condition.
Yeah, I mean, at least thank you for that, Cade. With the ending part, I mean, once again, it seems like we are just, in a way, are trying to psychoanalyze or, have a kind of guesswork as to people's motivations or whatever it is. I'm not really interested in that. I would say, by the way, I do have like 10 or 15 minutes because I actually have another conversation with another person right after this. So for me, it would be 9 o'clock. So right now it's 8:44 for me. But yeah, okay. So let's see where we can get. Let me see if I can get some clarifications in the pleasure. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned, I think, different kinds of pleasure. So I agree there are different kinds of pleasure. Would you say that the say, for example, the pleasure in same-sex sexual activity or in that act, is it a romantic pleasure?
Most of the time, yes.
So why would you say most of the time? Sorry, actually, let me clarify, right?
Yeah.
So there's informed consent, as you mentioned. I think you mentioned informed consent, and it's just this lesbian who met this other lesbian on this dating app, and they're like, hey, let's get together, and they're both going to have sex. Would you say that that's the case where it is a romantic pleasure, and they don't have this orgasmia or something like that?
Oh, you're talking about the couple that can't have penetrative sex, or the couple that does?
That can't, because they're lesbians, right? Or I mean,
are they still feeling romantic feelings? If I would assume so.
Okay, so what would you say is the difference between the romantic feeling with these two couple going and eating ice cream or writing a book together or feeding the poor at the soup kitchen and still getting pleasure from that? What would you say is the difference there? Like, there's this pleasure in the sexual realm, and then there's this pleasure elsewhere. Like, what would you say is the difference?
The difference from the romantic angle or the pleasure angle?
So the romantic connected with the sexual act that they're doing versus feeding the poor versus writing the book together, eating ice cream together with the sunset.
I think even from a Catholic standpoint, that you can build a more meaningful and romantic connection, let's say going on a date with somebody to volunteer at the homeless kitchen, and in many ways can be more romantic than disconnected, terrible sex. Right? Like, I think I'd agree with you that, I think many people can have a more romantic and a deeper connection through non-sexual things than through sexual things, and vice versa. That in many ways, sexuality or expression thereof can be more romantic than going to the soup kitchen, but it is subjective, I think, at the end of the day, right? Like, what do people form romantic connections doing? It would seem a good question to ask people.
Yeah, and I would answer probably similar to what you're saying. Like, hey, these two people, they like each other. They're feeding the poor at the soup kitchen, and they're saying, hey, I this is a romantic kind of pleasure I feel. I would probably go your route as well. Like if I didn't find out about this argument from Proust, I would probably say, yeah, that's a romantic love they have. But actually, Proust would argue no, or somewhere specifically, a romantic kind of pleasure. Romantic love, I think Proust says specifically. But in where I'm going, it's romantic pleasure. I now would say no because of what Proust says, which is consider, for example, that instead of this lesbian with this other lesbian, just forget one lesbian. This one lesbian is just now feeding the poor with her mom. It's just eating ice cream with her mom. It's just seeing the sunset. It's just writing the book with her mom. There's still that pleasure. That dopamine rush is still there. What makes it essentially different from the lesbian? And basically, Proust's answer is actually romantic loves, basically, he says. I think I should have had this in my notes, but this is Minh interpreting it, so possibly not what Proust is saying. The essential thing that comes in romantic love is that it is a bodily union, so bodily sexual union that is co-joint towards the end of reproduction. Or I think Proust would more argue like it becomes an organ, and so there's this striving, not necessarily that reproduction does happen. So like infertile couples, there's still a striving towards reproduction. Just as, for example, in a football game, the players are striving to win, even if they do not win. At least they are in the game. They are with the right players. They have the right equipment and all the rest to be striving towards winning. So too with the couple that is infertile, they're striving towards that victory of reproduction, so to speak. And so that romantic love essentially is a biological, organic union wherein there is the reality of one flesh, quote unquote, that biblical data. But Proust also argues that this is something that even a non-believer can accept, that it is one flesh, one kind of organism in which there is this striving towards reproduction. And that is what romantic love looks like. And the reason he specifies it such is, as mentioned with some of the other examples, like, hey, what about what's the difference between this romantic love versus just doing this with your mom?
I think a helpful analogy that's kind of getting at the same angle is me going to get ice cream with the President of the United States is going to be different than getting ice cream with my grandpa. And there's certainly nothing objectively different about that societal interaction, except for the massive elephant in the room, which is the social norms and institutions and expectations and relationship that is being expected to be informed or to be created. Right? So I agree with the assessment that, yes, the romantic institution or the romantic intentions are what make it different. And they aren't subjective as in the same as, but they are deeply meaningful because they are subjective, right? Like, there is nothing philosophically different about the president of a country than anybody else, but is societally different. And so, yes, going on a date, let's say going to ice cream with one of my straight friends is going to be different than getting ice cream with somebody if I were single and going out on a date, are different to the point that I think we're going to have a similarity here, which is, what's the expectation here? What are we open to? What is this relationship that we are negotiating? And I don't think that has to do with the type of sex two people getting ice cream might have, or the phenotypical expression of their sexual faculties. I don't see why the societal roles and expectations aren't a good differentiator, but that genitals are.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. So it seems like so ice cream with grandpa versus the president. By the way, I have like 5 minutes because I want to use the restroom
Yeah.
before the other meeting. But getting ice cream with grandpa versus the president, I would apply. Yeah, this is just not romantic, right? So yeah, sure, there's some societal difference and all the rest. Like they're both humans, but this is not in the context of it being in romantic love. You mentioned societally. Different in getting, or maybe like in terms of consent. I'm not exactly sure where you were going with this. Consent or agreement, openness to what this relationship would be between getting ice cream with my straight friend versus another person I'm going on a date with. So yeah, I mean I can see that there's a difference, say, in the objects, but getting the ice cream with my straight friend, what makes it specifically different than getting ice cream with the person I'm getting a date with? Is it merely just mental consent? Consider, for example, we go back to the case of my mom, this lesbian girl with her mom. She's going out to eat ice cream with her mom, but turns out her mom is also lesbian, and now they are consenting. They're like, yes, I want to this. This is an official date, and so there's obviously ancestry that happens. I think that what we can start with at least is there's something wrong with ancestry right here, even if there is consent, even if they're not harming anybody. Presumably they get like a kind of dopamine rush, this mom and this lesbian, but somehow we still have an intuition that that's wrong. Or consider the case of the terrible case of bestiality, right? So the beast somehow wants it, and this wicked Bob person, once again, this hypothetical wicked Bob person, I'm sorry if your name is Bob out there, is like wicked with this relation going forward with this beast. Or consider the case of a comatose person, okay? This person who's about to go into a coma says, hey, Bob, I give you my consent in this written form that you can do whatever you want with my body as I am in this comatose position. So there's consent, and you're not going to be harming anybody, right, Bob? And then Bob's like, yes, I'm not going to harm anybody. Of course, I love you. And so the person goes into the comatose position, and he does his thing with this. Or even in the terrible case of I can name a whole ton more. That's just terrible.
Yeah.
But the basic point is those who, I think, people who, I should not say people as it's just they and them, but if we hold to the position of homosexuality being okay, and we don't have a better worldview than just simply informed consent and not harming and having like better, more happiness, more pleasure, then these cases of the beasts, of the comatose person, of ancestry, why is it wrong? Is it wrong? Well, okay, there's consent. It seems like, okay, even with the animal, like the animal is going forward for it.
Yeah, I'll disagree on that first premise there. I don't think consent is there.
Okay. Okay.
Because I think consent, right, so we talk about informed, enthusiastic, ongoing consent, seems to explain away most of these cases, as well as if we allow some sort of rule utilitarianism and societal good, some form of virtue ethics in. And maybe the ending note is like, I was just doing an interview with Dustin Crummett on ethics, and one of his points is like, it's not Catholic conservative sexual ethics or complete like calculated utilitarianism where we're like pipetting distilled amounts of harm. There are a number of sexual ethics and metaethics surrounding these issues that seem to inform the data where we don't have this false binary. And I think perhaps on another episode we can dive into all of these different ethics, because it's not quite as simple as you're making it seem, and there are compelling answers to incest, bestiality, necrophilia, all of these other rules out there. So that would probably lead us into another discussion, but we got to get you out of here so that you can get to the next interview.
Okay, thank you so much, Kate. I really appreciate you, and much love to everybody out there. I genuinely mean it from my heart. It's great to philosophize with you, Kate.
Awesome. Perhaps we'll have to have you on again. Where can people find you and what you're posting and the work that you're up to?
On YouTube, Apologetics Catholic, Instagram, Kenio02, so KENIO02. You can also send me an email if you have a question, comment, or anything like that at, oh my goodness, this is actually Vietnamese. I speak Vietnamese as well. So Minh, so MINH, and then last name HOANG, and then KINHTHANH at gmail.com. Okay, so that just basically means Minh, my last name, Bible in Vietnamese.
That's awesome. And yeah, if people out there go check out his work, and if you want to make all this work possible, we're on Patreon for early access to all these episodes, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.